Hello, everyone, and welcome to our broadcast during this Women's History Month. I'm Juliette Marsh, and it is a great pleasure for me to engage in conversation here with Dr. Dashevsky. Welcome. So, Dr. Dashevsky, could you start by sharing a little bit with us about yourself and your journey of becoming a physician?
Yeah, so I've been medical director of breast imaging now for 4 years for Providence, both at our Santa Rosa and Petaluma locations. I also oversee the breast imaging section of our radiology group. I really love my colleagues and patients. I feel like we're working so hard every day to make something difficult easier for women. I'm also a mom to a 2.5-year-old girl, and I have a baby on the way due in 2 months. My husband of nearly 11 years and I are avid rock climbers, and we really enjoy the outdoors, which is what drew us to Northern California. I grew up on the East Coast in a hardworking middle-class town. I'm one of 5 kids and the oldest of triplets. So my mom was a stay-at-home mom, but she was always interested in medicine and science, and I'm sure that had an impact on me as a kid. She went back to school when we were in high school, and she used to post her grades on the fridge, and we only would put our grades on the fridge if they were equal to or better than my mom's. So, and then my dad was a businessman, and he always emphasized how important it was that we were independent and worked for our spending money. So when I went to university, I was getting a tour of the school, before we started. And the man getting a tour of the school pointed out, oh, over there's my research lab. And I was passionate about medicine. I knew I liked sciences. So right after the tour, I ran up to him and said, hey, can I have a job working in your lab? Little did I know that he was a world-renowned researcher studying these, little proteins that help salt move in and out of cells. So he actually said yes. I started working in his lab, and I became really enthralled with science. It was a very exciting time, and his first student actually won the Nobel Prize while I was working in his lab. So naturally, I became just so passionate about it, and that led me to go on and get my doctorate in physiology, before then realizing how much I missed the idea of seeing patients and the clinical applications. So I went back to medical school to pursue medicine.
That's great. Oh, I love the idea of your mom's grades being on the fridge too, and that's setting that standard. And now, as a mom yourself, can you share with us a little bit about, we all have our different tools and ways that we try to juggle and balance family and work and your own personal interests? Or what are some of the things that you've found have been helpful for you, and how has that changed over time?
Yeah. So I think you talk to a woman, the biggest change is becoming a mom and figuring out how you balance your career and your family life. I think this was put to the test for women across the country when the pandemic hit. And this has just become so much more relevant with all these women leaving the workforce because of childcare needs. And, how do we make it work? My daughter is 2.5 now. And when the pandemic started, we just transitioned from her being in a daycare to finding a nanny because I wanted her to get a little more attention. And I felt very lucky that we were able to afford and financially do that, but it wasn't easy. We still had times where, the nanny might have COVID and you can't have the nanny come take care of your child, or vice versa. And how do you balance work with that and your career, your husband's career, and also, wanting to spend time with your child? So we used to have this kind of regular routine when it was a normal day with no, disaster, where, we go to work, we come home, everyone's home and at the table by 6 o'clock. 6 to 7:30 is dinner, family time. Our daughter goes to bed at 7:30. When 7:30 hits, 3 days a week, we take naps and we go. My husband and I are avid rock climbers, and we go rock climbing, or we go climbing at the gym, if it's a weekday, 3 days a week, or have a date night. And that we just made that a rule so that we always had date night and our own, time. But I think as I'm planning for this upcoming baby, I see how much more challenging it will be with a second child. And I think the important thing for women is to really look at your connections, your network, not just your family, but your friends, the people in your daycare. Who can you reach out to in an emergency? How are you going to navigate a last minute disaster, a flat tire, your kid's sick? Because these things come up all the time. It's not once every few months, it's once every week. And knowing who you can reach out and be there for, and they'll return the favor for you. So I think I spent a lot of time figuring that out, and hopefully it will make things smoother with the second child.
It's interesting going from 1 to 2. I found like I was constantly stretched. So I'm grateful to hear that you're developing that sense of community. And you're right that so much is about navigating the unexpected and
Yeah,
how we're able to continually do that.
for sure. The radiology group I work with has also been phenomenal. I think as we're struggling with this shortened, more compressed workforce with, lots of people having left, both early retirement or just not realizing something else might be more important to them. People are really valuing women and realizing, hey, what can we do to make the women in our practice more happy or more, it work for them? So we've started allowing people working more remote, being more flexible with our hours. And I'm hoping that this is a positive change that we see going forward for people. The pandemic's been a real struggle, but I think that it may teach us a few things about how we can optimize things a little bit better.
Absolutely, right? There are some things that we don't want to lose, actually, even in how we've collectively navigated the unexpected of COVID, too. Yeah, nice. Well, who are some of the women that have inspired you?
So, there are lots of inspiring women, but on a really personal level, when I was in undergrad, I was at a conference, and there was a woman in particular, Fran Ashcroft. She's actually a Dame. She was awarded Dame for her services in medical science and her increasing public awareness of the sciences. So basically, there is a type of diabetes that's very rare, where children have diabetes, but they also have developmental delay and epilepsy. And these patients were previously treated with insulin. So she discovered that these children had a mutation and a protein related to one that I had been studying when I was in undergrad. And what she found is that there were actually drugs already on the market that bound to this protein. So if you could treat the patients with these drugs, sulfonylurea drugs, it would treat not just the diabetes, but all the extra pancreatic symptoms. And so these patients went from not being able to walk or talk to living their normal lives. And not only did she help make this discovery, but she went on to, advertise in the community, increase awareness. And it was just so remarkable to me that someone could make that leap, that bridge between research and the sciences. But then on top of that, so I met her at a conference, and I had told her how impressed I was with her work. And later I wound up going and giving a talk to her group, a talk at Oxford, which then led to me working in her lab and getting my doctorate with her as my supervisor. But she was just a tremendous role model. I suffered a very serious injury when I was in grad school. And I remember she wasn't just an amazing researcher. She was someone that I came into work and I must have seemed a little bit off. I had suffered a really bad head injury, and she took me in and I lived with her until I was healthy and well enough to fly back to the United States to recover. So she was someone that was just, it's so amazing and so impressive to me. And I do think about her when I see people kind of going through different parts of their careers and how you can help them and make something happen for someone that you see a lot of potential with.
I love, though, that there's something about your the resourcefulness too that inspires you, but also your own sense of initiative, right? Like even in the two stories that you told of seeing something and being willing to be that voice and that advocate for yourself too, and to ask, to approach, to have that inquisitive way of being in the world is so it's really crucial to who we are. And I appreciate that glimpse
Thank you.
of who you are. Yeah.
Thank
And I
you.
think it
I
sounds
think it's important for all women, that we have to really reach out and ask for things if we want them. And I think sometimes we hold back and are a little shy. And I think when we don't, you actually stand a lot to gain.
Mhm, mhm. Well, and that leads actually to something a little more clinical that I'd love to give you the opportunity to discuss as well, is that, as you know, studies have shown that during the COVID-19 pandemic, it's really impacted breast cancer diagnoses, and it's really due a lot to the decline in screenings and delays in those diagnoses and treatment. And I was hoping you might help us understand what it is that we can do to increase awareness for our community with regard to breast cancer screenings and really being that advocate for yourself.
So you're right. We saw a tremendous fall on screening exams. In part, initially there was just so much fear. We didn't know what this virus was. We didn't have vaccines available. So we actually screening exams shut down. We had to close for some time, and then when we reopened, there was still a lot of hesitation about coming back and getting that. So we are seeing this enormous influx of patients now, with some people being 2 or 3 years, overdue for their screening exam. So, I think there are a lot of things we can do on a personal level. I went and got my screening exam and, messaged all my sisters saying, hey, I got mine. Did you guys get yours? It's really not that bad. But I think also we have to eliminate barriers for our patients. One of the things that's really challenging is because there was just this flood of patients coming back for screeners. Initially, when we started to loosen up, we had a huge backlog. So we would have a long wait list. You would call in to get your appointment and it would be booked far out, or you would wait online on hold for a long period of time. And we worked really hard to change that. So now, Providence has done such an amazing job of trying to address this backlog. Now we answer 85% of our calls within a minute. So that people can get scheduled right away. The other thing we did is we removed the need to place an order or have an order for a screening mammogram at our Santa Rosa location. And I'm hoping that's something we can implement at other locations. So you don't have two doctors. A lot of people have to go to their doctor and get their referral and then go get their screening mammogram. You don't have to do that anymore. You can just call and make your appointment. So we're trying to make it easier. In the past, we've had evening events or weekend events, which were really, curtailed because of the pandemic. But as staffing gets ramped up again, I'm hoping we can have more of these events in the evenings and weekends that make it easier for work families that are working or caring for children or their parents. Times where people are more able to come in and make it easier to get screened. And then kind of the last thing is really, we all have friends and family or know someone that has been diagnosed with breast cancer. And I think it's important to be supportive of them, but also say, hey, what can I do for myself and how can I take care of my own health too? And, be supportive of your friends with breast cancer and also increase awareness of, hey, this is something important that you do have to take care of. We spend so much time focusing on how we can help other people. And it's really important that we also look at our own health.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love that you're being intentional about easing the way for people to have access. It's so in line with our mission and our promise in particular of Providence, where we want to know you and care for you and ease your way. And recognizing, even as we started with the complexity of juggling many things as women, to think about having that easier direct access is something that eases the way of our patients.
100%. One of the other things I know Vicki Head is working on with our group is not just eliminating orders, but being able to just log in and self-schedule. And that is something, you can do it when you go to want to book your hair appointment or something else. But with mammography, come April, we anticipate that we'll be able to launch self-scheduling where you can just go online and book it and have it there ready for you. And I think that is going to make a huge difference for patients.
Well, I love that it's in line with our mission and our values. I appreciate that so much. And also that you were saying about, being your own advocate and thinking about your own self-care. I know one of the things in my life that's been important for me too is that I have a great many people who rely on me. And so recognizing the importance of my own health is that it's not just for me, it's actually for all of those that also rely on me. And so that reminder to your sisters, that reminder to your girlfriends, but also just sharing your own story like you're doing, and sharing that you had an appointment, that you went for your screening, is then reminding others that it's not just self-care, but it's also part of the ways that we care for those that have been entrusted to us as well.
Yeah. I remember I was giving a talk a while back, and one of the things at the end of the meeting, someone said, well, what can we do when we hang up this call to improve, women's awareness? And it was Andrea Learned, and she said, hey, how about everyone when they leave here, they remind 10 of their friends, hey, go get your screening exam, don't forget. And I think if we all did that, it would make a huge difference.
Absolutely. Well, can you provide a little guidance for us on breast cancer screenings? So some of the details of when to start, how often should we screen? What are some of the important risk factors that we should be aware of?
Sure. So it's recommended that you start breast cancer screening at age 40, not later than 45. A lot of different organizations have different guidelines, and the important reason to why you start young is that when you're young, breast cancer is more likely to be more aggressive, but it is much more common as you get older. So as long as you are in good health, you can continue breast cancer screening if your life expectancy is greater than 10 years. Now, that starting at 40 is not true for everyone. There are different risk factors, like you said. So the most common risk factor is just being a woman and getting older, things that we cannot avoid. So that applies to everyone. But if you do have a first-degree relative with breast cancer, someone that be below the age of 40 in your family with breast cancer, someone with triple-negative breast cancer, colon cancer before age 50, metastatic breast cancer. There are lots of risk factors that increase the likelihood that you have a genetic mutation or a reason to get screened sooner. So when you come for your screening exam, Dr. Tito is our head of breast surgery. She helped develop a screening tool, and we use that along with other factors to help you decide, are you at a risk for a genetic mutation? And then we also use a tool to say, what is your lifetime risk of breast cancer? So if you are at a genetic risk, you may benefit from genetic counseling, and that might help you decide when and how early to screen. But also, if your risk of breast cancer is greater than 20%, besides screening mammograms, you can consider yearly screening mammograms in conjunction with breast MRI. And tomosynthesis detects about 8 cancers per 1,000 women. Breast MRI detects 16 cancers per 1,000 women. So there are incredible tools available for you for breast cancer screening. And it only takes a few minutes to figure this out. Usually, if you do have a family member with breast cancer, you want to start screening 5 years before your youngest relative that was diagnosed, but not before age 30. And if you come in and see us, we're happy to work with you to figure out what is the optimal time and help you figure out the risks and benefits.
Great. And then I know there are a lot of misconceptions out there. So could you share with us a little bit about some of the misconceptions around breast cancer?
So we hear a lot in our community about fears of radiation exposure and the effect on cancer risk. The radiation exposure with breast cancer screening is extremely, extremely low, and there's no risk proven with mammography. Another thing we hear a lot about is, how am I getting diagnosed with breast cancer? No one in my family, no one I know has breast cancer. Well, 90% of women do not have a genetic mutation when they're diagnosed with breast cancer. So most people, this is, it is not genetic whatsoever. Another thing is pain. So a lot of people come in with pain. Usually pain is not a sign of breast cancer, but it can be a sign of other things, which is why if you have focal pain in one area of your breast, come on in. We'll make sure there isn't an infection, an abscess, something causing it, maybe a cyst. Yeah. Now, if unfortunately you get diagnosed with breast cancer, it used to be in the past that you would need to remove your whole breast. That is not true anymore. Most patients can have just a small piece of their breast tissue removed. We remove the cancer in the surrounding area. So you can keep your breast tissue. And fortunately, insurance coverage now includes reconstructive surgery if that's something that's important to you. So there are a lot of things we can do. So what we're really looking for, so besides coming in for your screening exam, That's really important. We can detect cancer much, much sooner with a screening exam than before you feel it. So usually if you were to feel a lump in your breast, it would have to be at least 2 centimeters for you to feel it. That's also dependent on how superficial it is in your breast tissue or deep it is in your breast tissue. Whereas with screening exams, we detect cancers that are only a few millimeters big. And that actually is a phenomenal invention because it really changes what your treatment is. So the smaller the cancer, the less aggressive therapy you'll need, depending on the type.
That's really helpful. It's interesting to think about all of the misconceptions that are out there because I've heard all of those. So I'm grateful for you to be able to set our minds at ease about some of the reality around that too.
Yeah, the other one that I get that I actually get more often than I would expect is that a lot of people are afraid to get something biopsied that somehow sampling the tissue would spread cancer elsewhere in their body. And this is a very smart thought because that's true of a few cancers, but not true of breast cancer. So, getting tested, for breast cancer will not spread your breast cancer. It's very important for people to know because a lot of people will avoid getting treated for this fear.
Yes, absolutely. And then how about those spouses and partners and families companioning those who have been diagnosed with breast cancer? What advice would you give to them?
So yeah, it can be extremely difficult emotionally when you get a new diagnosis of breast cancer. Um, Usually, when I first talk to patients, they're usually in shock, and we try to be as upfront as possible about what the expectation is. A lot of people do extremely well with breast cancer, with treatment, with surgery, but it is definitely an emotional toll and physical toll for your family. So for your support community, your spouses, your children, usually the first thing you can do is just ask and listen. Ask what they need. A lot of people tend to shy away from these conversations because they're afraid they don't know what to say. And the first thing is just to say, hey, I know you have this diagnosis. How can I be there for you? What is it that would make this easier for you? How can I help you get through this next part of your life? This difficult time. Then a lot of it, it's usually the first part, the getting the diagnosis is the hardest part because at that point, we usually don't have all the information. So there's a lot of fear in terms of the unknown. And each step becomes a little bit easier once you have a plan that you can just check off the boxes and say, okay, well, we're getting our surgery. We're getting the next step in treatment. And that makes a world of difference. So I think you can also celebrate each milestone once you have a plan, knowing what the steps are and knowing what your end date is really empowering for people. Saying, 4 months from now, I'm going to be done this entirely. I'll be done my surgery. I'll be done my hormone therapy, chemotherapy, radiation therapy, whatever it is that the surgical plan is. It can take some time to deal with. But knowing when that date is really helpful to put those little stars on the calendar and plan for it. And then also, the obvious thing is a lot of women are taking care of the household and doing a lot of little chores. And I think doing those things are really a big deal. Sending your friend dinner for the night so they don't have to rush home and figure out dinner when they're trying to cope with this emotional stress, something like that, or figuring out someone to help clean the house. These little things make a world of difference when you're going through a hard time.
Well, our value of compassion, right? It literally means to suffer with, but it has this component where we say that you're moved with compassion because you want to do something about it, even when you're completely powerless to take it away. And so compassion is the reason that we see people show up at the hospital and they sit, or they go to an appointment with someone and they sit, or you show up with food because you didn't know what else to do, or you call and you don't know what to say, but you just want them to know that they're not alone. And so I love that that spirit of being able to just find ways to suffer with someone, even in the small things, even in the really gentle things that can make a really big difference too. And
That's
those
that's a really
concrete,
wonderful way to put it. Yeah, because it's really the doing nothing that's the problem. You really just acknowledging and doing something, anything, it will will matter to the person.
Yes, definitely. Well, I appreciate the clinical piece, but if we could shift back to this context of Women's History Month and some of the ways, could you think about or have you given thought to some ways that we might be able to amplify the voices of women, particularly as we think about the importance of women during this time in March?
Yeah, so one of the things you can do is when you have women making an accomplishment, you often find that we're a little shy or not as outspoken about our successes. And I think it's a big deal to sit there and say, "Oh, did you see this big accomplishment that so and so made?" So we can amplify each other's voices, and just acknowledging that we're not doing it on our own often enough. That if you can do it for your friends, for your colleagues, that is really, really crucial. And then in terms of amplifying your own voice, when you do something and you're not getting that attention or people aren't listening or taking the action that you want, you can try other means. But what I think is most helpful is finding a really strong team of people that will help amplify your voice and asking them to. So, we were talking about screening and scheduling. And I remember when this first came up, and all of these people were finding the same issue and we're all pushing independently. But when we come together, people really start to listen. So, we actually have this phenomenal breast leadership program. And when we look at the breast team, we have our oncologist that's a woman, we have our head of pathology, our head of breast surgery. All these people, when I need something, what I do is I reach out to them and say, "Hey, is this also impacting you? Can you also push hard on this topic? It's important to me. And this is why it's important to me. Is it important to you too?" And I think doing that is a great way to build your community and help amplify your voice. And these sorts of things help you create other contexts that are higher level that can have even greater impact. So I think that those are the little things that you can really do day to day and look for in your own network.
And I love the notion of supporting each other too, right? We want to be able to do that for one another. And I think that there are ways in which we encourage one another and build up one another that truly do make a difference too. So thank you for that. And what about women in your particular field? Do you have any advice if there's someone who wants to pursue an aspect of science and research and now all that you've been able to accomplish?
Yeah. So, it's interesting. Breast imaging is really unique because we didn't really start doing breast imaging until the 1950s when Nancy Reagan, the first lady, got diagnosed with breast cancer. It really increased breast cancer awareness. But what this meant is we've had this huge transition in breast imaging field where it was really a male-dominated field. But as all of a sudden we had all these women enter the workforce in the 80s and 90s, and what that meant for a lot of women is that now we have new opportunity in breast imaging because a lot of places are looking to have female involved in their breast imaging section, their breast imaging division. So I think there are lots and lots of opportunities for women now to start getting involved specifically in breast imaging. I have friends that have started their own practices right out of fellowship. I became director right out of fellowship here because there were lots of openings for women. What you can do is find that mentor that is going to support you and help ease your way, as we say, and in your role and navigate a path for yourself that works. With medicine, there are lots of opportunities for sure for women, and it's a really, really wonderful field. Then also just look at what barriers you find and see, well, how can I get around that? Or what you see as a barrier might not be. And I think I've given a few examples of things where, you kind of just stretch yourself a little bit and see where it takes you, because that makes a huge, huge difference. And then the last thing is identify your strengths and see how you can apply it to whatever field you want to go into. So if you're really good at something, for me, it's research. I was really, really strong researcher, and I knew that I could pivot that to different areas. And so see how you can take something that you already have as a strength and pivot it to something that you're trying to expand into.
Nice. Scripture would use a fancy Greek word called a charism. And that's where we get charisma and charismatic. And it really is just that. It's a gift. So where are your gifts? Where are your strengths? And then how can you use those, put those really to the service of humanity, right? In response to the signs of the times. So that's a really beautiful way that you phrase that, to be able to help us first identify what are the things that we're passionate about and that we're good at, and how do we then lay those into the service of the common good too. And finally, I'd love to know a little bit more about, in concluding, what does Women's History Month mean to you?
For me, it's just a time to really reflect on the women that have been so important or crucial in my life, how they've helped me, what they've done for me. And it meant that I sat back and said, "Oh, hey, I haven't reached out to this person in so long." And that's really what I've done with this month. I said, "Oh, this person I really value and respect, and they meant so much to me. We've lost touch." And so that's a lot of what I've been doing this month. And I know a lot of people that are probably doing the same sort of thing, where you've lost touch. It's been a while, but it just makes you reflect on people that really matter a lot to you in your life, or have played a pivotal role, and reaching out and reestablishing those connections.
Well, and I also appreciate that, Providence and the world at large has taken intentional steps to be able to make more information available to us. And being able to learn about some of these extraordinary women, right, calls us back to who we are. And then, like you said, that personal connection of who those mentors have been for us and who are the companions that we have along the journey. So in that spirit of gratitude, I know that we're going to be mindful of our own health, our own well-being, and encouraging one another and encouraging screenings for one another. And then also celebrating, as you reminded us, celebrating the women in your lives, celebrating the gifts that we have been given, and how we can continue to use those to serve the greater good. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise and your energy, and we wish you the very best.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that concludes our time together. So thank you for carving out some time in your day to also reflect on the importance of Women's History Month and how we might be advocates for ourselves as well as companions on the journey for one another.